What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and we got a big week planned here coming up. In the next week, I'm going to give you an analysis of the standard meta, tell you all the best decks in the format right now. I'm going to give you a rogue brew of my own that I'm really proud of, and I'm going to talk to you about the cards that I want reprinted the most in Dominaria. So, super fun week coming up, but before we get into all that, I figured I'd stop off and do a budget list, because I noticed we haven't done enough budget decks this standard yet. I really wanted to fix that mistake. So, today we're going to talk about a $35 list with a ton of upgrade options. Here's blue-black control for you. When building any control deck, you're essentially looking to do four things. You want to remove creatures, you want to counter spells, you want to draw cards, and you want to close the game out with a big dumb finisher. That's about it. So let me take you through each of those categories first here, starting with removal, because it's usually the most important thing in a control deck. And even with all the budgetary restrictions that we're up against, we still get to play some pretty good removals. Let me show that to you real quick. We're going to play 4 copies of Moment of Craving for when we need a nosh. We're going to play 3 copies of Essence Extraction, Ol E squared, and 2 copies of Final Reward, which you'll probably never see in a deck tech on any channel on YouTube, but it's here. Now, towards the end of the video, I'll take you through some upgrades, because there's a ton of upgrades for this deck, but these are definitely passable removal cards. Moment of Craving is actually a lot better than anyone ever thought it was. Like, it's already showing up in sideboards and some control lists and in actual, real competitive standard decks, because it's so good against mono red, and mono red is definitely still a force. It's decent against most other aggro decks, too. It's just being able to kill almost any 1 or 2 drop in the format, and even some 3 drops, and gain 2 life back is actually sort of, it's basically tempo against aggro decks. So this is actually a fantastic card that's instant speed too. Like, there's a lot to like about Moment of Craving. It's actually solid removal. And we've also got the Essence Extraction, which is like a slightly bigger and better Moment of Craving, you know. Negative is different than damage. We gotta at least point that out. But these are very similar cards, and Essence Extraction just kills slightly bigger creatures and gains us a little bit more life. I actually really like that we have like 7 different spells that gain us life when they remove a creature. That's amazing in the early game against aggro, and we're really, really likely to draw 1 or even 2 of these pieces early in the game. That's super awesome for staving off the tide against aggro and helping us get to something like Final Reward, you know. It's awesome that our removal spells gain us life, because even though Final Reward isn't exactly, you know, Vraska's Contempt or anything, it's a whole turn slower than that, and it's not as clean an answer to Hazard Red or the Scarab God or Glory Bringer. It's still a decent answer, and the fact that a lot of our removal gains us life means that we can more easily get to Final Reward in the first place. So I actually kind of really like this basic removal package altogether. But that's just the 1-for-1 removal. We also gotta play some sweepers in this deck so we don't get overwhelmed in the early game. So with that in mind, here's 3 copies of Golden Demise and 2 copies of Bantu's Last Reckoning for when you absolutely have to kill every last creature in the room, to paraphrase Sam Jackson. We really don't care about the Ascend on Golden Demise, literally at all, not at all. Just, we need a decent low-to-the-ground sweeper, only costs 3 mana. It's a nice deal. It's going to kill a lot of aggro-oriented creatures. It's going to kill lords and merfolk and vampires. Kills tokens like crazy against Anointed Procession and stuff. Just an all-around decent sweeper, especially in the early turns, and can even be played later sometimes, and you'll end up getting a 3 or 4-for-1 off of it, which is really important. You know, we've got a lot of 1-for-1 removal in the deck. We got to play some sweepers so we can get, you know, 2, 3, and 4-for-1 removal sometimes, so they don't just out-creature us in really, really long games. So it's important to play some sweepers so we can get mega value off of them. And Bantu's Last Reckoning is just, you know, again, the board gets too scary, a little bit too big. You'll leave behind 2 or 3 guys if you Golden Demise. Bantu's Last Reckoning is great in that situation, and that usually doesn't happen until a little bit later on in the game when it's, you know, not so impactful that you don't get to untap. Because even if you spend 3 mana on turn 6 or 7 on a Bantu's Last Reckoning, chances are you'll still have 3 or 4 mana at least to work with on the next turn, so it's not so bad. That was 14 different pieces of main deck removal that we're playing, but we also got to counter spells in our control deck. So let's look at our counter spell suite right here. We're playing 12 different counter spells, play sets of all. Here's Supreme Will, Essence Scatter, and Cancel. Yes, I'm playing Cancel. This is a very, very budget deck, but Cancel is actually still fine in Standard. A 3 mana hard counter in Standard is actually not terrible, so we'll play that all day. Of course, you can replace it with Disallow if you have the, whatever it is, $5 or $6 at this point, but Cancel is 5 or 6 cents. So if we're trying to build a budget deck, I'll play it. It's still a hard counter like 90% of the time. So we'll take that. Doesn't counter activated abilities or anything like Disallow, but it's still a more than passable hard counter nowadays. So we'll do that. Supreme Will and Essence Scatter, though, are especially good right now. You know, Essence Scatter actually turns out to be one of the best answers to the hardest to answer creatures in the entire format. Just counter them, you know. Hazoret's got Indestructible. Ronus has Indestructible. Who cares? Just counter them. Scarab God comes back if you kill it while it's on the board. Well, just never let it hit the board in the first place. You know? Supreme Will is more or less a hard counter through the most important turns of the game, and after that, it's an impulse, which we will also take. Card selection's important. Seriously, just to close things out here, Supreme Will is ridiculous. It's a little expensive for an uncommon, but even if it is expensive for one, it's still really cheap in the scheme of things to pay 65 cents a piece for a card that gives us ridiculous options. Now, we also want to draw some cards, at least a little bit, in this deck. So we're going to play 4 copies of Glimmer of Genius. Now, we're not really doing anything at all with the energy, but it is in no way unheard of to play Glimmer of Genius in a control deck that doesn't care about the energy. We're definitely going to do that here, because even though we don't care about that, we still get to scry and draw 2 cards at instant speed. This is still a great play at the end of your opponent's turn, almost any time in the entire game. It just lets us see so many cards and get so much advantage out of it. And at instant speed, it's essentially free at the end of an opponent's turn. It's hard to beat Glimmer. Seriously, there aren't even any, like, over-budget options that I'd rather play here. Just, even if you're building the deck with all the money in the world, play 4 Glimmer of Genius. It's a really good card. But we gotta finish the game off somehow. Hey, Julie's up there now. But anyway, they're gonna sleep together. It's gonna be really, really cute. It's gonna be adorable. They're about to do it. Oh, there they go. Have a seat, Julie. Oh, she's cleaning him. They're the sweetest. But anyway, we got to finish the game off here somehow. So I hate to cover the cats up for now, but I got to show you the 2 copies of Torrential Gearhulk that I want to start off the finishers section with. Well, I know that Tori's a little bit expensive, $10.50 a pop. That's definitely the most we'll pay for a card in this deck. And if you didn't play Torrential Gearhulk at all, you can get out of here for well under $20. But honestly, I don't think it's worth it. If we're going to play one card that's a little bit out of the budget here, I'd rather cheat and play Torrential Gearhulk than something like Fatal Push or Vraska's Contempt. Literally half of our deck is cards that we can recast with a Torrential Gearhulk. And then suddenly we get a counterspell or a removal spell. It's almost always a 2-for-1, and it ends up with you blowing your opponent out and ending up with a 5-6. It's just like so much power. So there's just really no replacement at all for this, and I think it's worth spending a couple of $10 bills to play a couple of copies of Torrential Gearhulk. It'll just win you the game. That's what it's for. But we're playing another 2 of in this deck that's brand new from Rivals of Ixalan, and that's Nizahal, the Primal Tide. This thing is actually crazy. Like, Nizahal is the control killer. The approach decks, Blue-Black Control, Grixis Energy, they all play 26 to 30 spells. So something like this can just end up drawing us a bunch of cards, even if they're not trying to remove it, you know, but if they do try to remove it, it's really hard for them to actually pull that off, and they can't counterspell it even after we try to play it again. Just the card is absolutely ridiculous. A 7/7 is going to threaten to get through eventually, and eventually it will, and just end the game for you. This is one of my favorite, like, obvious anti-control finishers in a really, really long time. I like this at least as much as Sphinx of the Final Word. It's just almost impossible to deal with. You can't counter it, and you can't really kill it once it hits the battlefield. If you get 7 mana, then you can end the game. This is actually a really, really effective finisher that they can't do anything about, and it just draws you cards. Oh, and by the way, no maximum hand size too. Don't forget that, so you just be chilling with like 12 cards towards the end of the game. The thing is just unbelievable. Play Nizahal. It's actually really impressive. We're going to play 26 lands in our control deck. That sounds about right, I think. Evolving Wilds looks just like a poor man's fetch land, but actually, I'd still keep it in even if we were spending money to build this deck. Because if we're spending money to build it, we'd have Fatal Push. And there you go. Evolving Wilds is the cheapest and easiest way in Standard to revolt a Fatal Push. So I'd probably keep it in. Submerged Boneyard, it might still be a 2 of even if you got your Drowned Catacombs. And obviously, these deserts can go right out the door if you ever get your hands on any fetid pools. So it's pretty easy to upgrade mana base right here. But for what we've got to work with, these are actually really cheap lands that are very effective. Here's our sideboard right here, and we actually have access to so many awesome options on a budget level in blue and black. You know, we've got Duress and Negate, which are arguably the 2 best sideboard cards in the format already. We get to play them in our budget deck. That's amazing, you know? This Negate is incredible against other control decks. Duress is incredible against other control decks. We suffer game 1 against control because we have all this essentially dead removal. They'll have a bunch of dead removal too, so at least there's that to fall back on. But Duress and Negate give us great options to where we can side out the majority of that removal and side in stuff that actually works against them, so that's important. Same thing with Doomfall. You know, Doomfall can come in against Indestructible indestructible creatures or bristling hydras and stuff, but it can also come in against control and stuff. This is essentially just exile the best card in your hand or your whole game plan in the case of, Approach of the Second Sun. So Doomfall is a really good card too. Crook of Condemnation will play over Silent Gravestone, but you really don't have to break the budget too much in order to get your hands on Silent Gravestone. Just Crook of Condemnation is the cheapest way we can get this effect in Standard. And then finally, River's Rebuke. This is for the rare tokens matchup, but they absolutely do exist, so I will play River's Rebuke. We'll definitely get, if all goes well, we'll get to the point where we can cast this spell. So even against mid-range and aggro decks, it's sometimes worth it to put in River's Rebuke. And before we get to the power rankings, and while I've still got the pretty graphic up here, I'll talk about the upgrades in this deck because they are numerous and they're relatively obvious, If you had the money, you could take out the Moment of Cravings or maybe move them to the sideboard and put in Fatal Push. This is the most obvious upgrade in the deck, I think, or one of the most obvious upgrades in the deck. Fatal Push is the best removal spell in Standard, only we really don't want to spend like $6 to $7 a copy for Fatal Push. We'd much rather spend 3 cents on Moment of Craving, right? And Moment of Craving is a good removal spell, but you can't deny the raw power of Fatal Push. It's absolutely ridiculous. Play it if you can. Same thing with Vraska's Contempt. This is the other most obvious upgrade in the deck, Instead of Final Reward, you want Vraska's Contempt all day. It's just a much better spell, much cleaner answer to all those hard-to-answer creatures. Comes down to turn earlier and gains some life back. It's an absolutely ridiculous removal spell, but it literally costs 125 times what Final Reward costs. So, if you've only got a few cents in your pocket, go ahead and pick up the Final Rewards. They're fine. But if you can, Vraska's Contempt is a much better option. You can also trade out the Cancel for Disallow. Again, Disallow is like $5, $6 right now. Cancel's 5 cents. So, but if you've got the Skrilla, go ahead and get the Disallows. You'll be much happier with those. And there's also the mana base. I talked about that. Drowned Catacomb you want to be looking for. Fetid Pools you want to go get if you possibly can. And if something, comes out in Dominaria that produces blue or black, go get that too. Go pick that up, son. Oh, and by the way, you might also want to pick up a Scavenger Ground or two. I think this deck has room for a colorless land like Field of Ruin, Scavenger Ground, or maybe even Arch of Araska for the very, very late game. You can draw extra cards, which is actually not terrible on turn 12. And finally, if you've got a couple of bucks in your pocket, you can just play more copies of Torrential Gearhulk. You can add the Scarab God to the deck, or you can play Search for Azcanta. I hear that's a pretty good card too. So there's a ton of upgrade options for this deck. And actually, we got a lot of room to upgrade and still be within a reasonable budget. You can add 2 Fatal Pushes or 2 Vraska's Contempts or a Torrential Gearhulk and still be under $50. And as a matter of fact, you can add like the playset of Fatal Pushes, 2 Vraska's Contempt, and a Torrential Gearhulk and still be a little bit under $100. So you don't have to spend much on this deck for it to actually have a lot of powerful cards in it. And finally, here are your power rankings. A final score of 55, which seems low. Control decks always suffer from like low score-itis because they're really bad in a couple of categories that they could care less about. They're not speedy, they're not aggressive or offensive, so they really don't care about those categories at all. We want to have high marks in defense. We want to be a resilient deck, and we pretty much hit the mark, especially for $35. And again, you want to upgrade this deck. It's easy, and you really don't have to spend all the money in order to get some pretty good stuff into this deck. But even without all the upgrades, this is a decent control deck right here. If you're interested in control, like you're just starting out, and you like the idea of being a control player, but control decks are expensive, and they are. Control decks tend to be some of the most expensive decks in the format because they play really, really powerful cards. A lot of them. But this one, not necessarily. If you just want to kind of dip your toe into control without, making the investment first, then you can go ahead and buy this list for like $35. Improve on it as you go. There's a ton of upgrade options for it if you're into that. But even without the upgrades, we have a decent removal package. We have a lot of really good counter spells. Like Essence Scatter and Supreme Will are just 2 of the best control cards in the entire format. And we get to play them for relatively cheap. We have some really good sideboard options and some proven finishers like Torrential Gearhulk along with some brand new stuff. That kind of has to be seen to be believed. Like Nezahal. I still can't always pronounce the name right. Nezahal is how you say it. Is absolutely ridiculous. You don't understand. You don't understand how effective a control finisher this card is. And if you are interested in trying this list out, you can always, as usual, click the first link in the description. Down there, it's right below the video. There will be this little thing that says show more. Just click that and then boom, you'll see the first link in the description. It'll take you over to TCG Player once you click it, and then you can see this entire deck list all at one time. They help sponsor my content. They're good folk, but they also happen to be where you can get this deck the cheapest online right now. It's only about $35, not counting the basic lands, because I assume that you have basic lands. Hopefully you do. So, not counting basic lands. It's only about $35 to build this thing on TCG Player. Plus, again, ton of upgrade options, and they're the cheapest place you can get all of those too. But I'm pretty sure I'm tapped out for this one. Make sure you like the video if you enjoyed the video. It helps me out. Puts the video in more recommended feeds. So do that stuff for me. Costs you nothing except for a second of your time. Hit the like button. You can also join the Strict Squad. I'm just going to call it something different every time now. The Strict Squad, the Strict Click. Just hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the bell for the notifications too. But that's all for this one, folks. I got a lot of content that I'm super stoked about coming up. You know, the next video that I do should be the full analysis of Standard, which is probably going to be a relatively long and in-depth video, but I'm excited to do it, and I'm pretty sure you guys want me to. So look out for that. Got to tell you about the top 10 reprints I want in Dominaria, and a super awesome brew that I've got that I'm really excited about. So make sure you sub, hit the bell, do all the things, keep checking back with the channel. There's a ton of awesome content coming up, but I'm pretty sure I'm done for now, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.